hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for upholding voting integrity, how Oakland County votes were counted. And again, my name is Kathy Henry. I'm with the League of Women Voters Oakland area. I'm on the Community Engagement Committee and the Advocacy Committee, and have been a member of the League since 2017. And I want to introduce to you our panelists. So we have Marne McGrath, and maybe you can wave to us, Marne. She is the Ferndale City Clerk and has been has had that position for the last 6 years. And then we have Kath Maisner. And Kath, where are you? Hello. And Kath was a precinct chair for 12 years, and this past cycle worked absentee ballots. And then we have Lisa Wetzen, who is from Pleasant Ridge, and she with this year worked on the absentee ballot counting board, and has also been a precinct worker in the past. So we're going to get started with Marne is going to give us an outline of, and actually we're going to go around and each person's going to give us a little outline of what their role was in the voting process, and how from their perspective the November election, what the November election process was for them. So Marne, you can go ahead and get started. I will.
Great. Thank you all so much for inviting me first from the League, and for everyone who's joining tonight. I am the Ferndale City Clerk, so my role in election is that I am the local election administrator for the city of Ferndale. Michigan has a decentralized election administration process. So what that means is that in many states, the counties oversee elections for each community, but in Michigan, we all do our own. So all the municipalities, all 1,600 plus of us, are managing the elections on our own with the support of the county and the state. So our process in Ferndale begins about 5 months out from each election date. So as you can imagine, we haven't had 15 months in 2020 to work on elections, but we've been working on them for that long. So we have a very long drawn out election calendar. It's kind of a checklist that we use to make sure that we are hitting each mandated election deadline. So ours, as I was putting together my presentation today, I thought, well, I'll just write down, election integrity from planning to certification in just XX easy steps. Well, I did write it down, and there were 86. So, I mean, there's plenty that I could be talking about, but, what we basically work from is there are different election laws in each state. So the Michigan election law governs how we do each process, each step of the way. So the bigger points to hit are that at least 75 days prior to each election, we're sending out absentee ballot applications to everyone on our permanent absentee voter list, which are the folks who have requested to receive an application prior to every election. So we are sending those out, and at this point, we're up into the thousands. Ferndale has 16,000 plus registered voters, and our permanent absentee list is now probably half of those folks. And before 2020, it was not. We have been working on building it up so that people are aware that elections are coming, because although this year it's very obvious that there was a November election, there are plenty of years where people don't know. Like even with the presidential primary in March, some people were like, why are we getting an application for an election? We didn't realize there was something coming. So it's really a great way to get that heads up, quite a ways in advance that there is an election coming. So everyone can request from their local clerk to be on their permanent absentee voter list. So we can start accepting those applications 75 days out from the election. And there are many things that happen between the beginning and when we actually get the ballots and get them out. We also have what's called logic and accuracy testing, which a lot of people are not aware that is done for every piece of election equipment. So every election voting machine and accessible ADA accessible device has to be tested prior to the election. And with the tabulators, what's important to note is that they have, the state has promulgated rules for the test deck. So you're creating every possible combination of things that can count on a ballot and that people can do that shouldn't count. So like all the ways of doing overvotes are checked. You put in a blank ballot, you put in the wrong precinct ballot. Everything is tested to make sure that once you put in all these different combinations of vote processes, that everything still tabulates correctly. So that's something that's done before absentee ballots are sent out or very shortly thereafter. So that's something that's tested, and as I said, that's a state regulation. It's part of Michigan election law, and it's a great way to find out, that everything is going to work right. And we also, there's an election commission that oversees everything, and the city has their own election commission, the county has an election commission, and everything is followed by those folks as well, so that we're certifying that everything that should be happening along the way is getting done. Ballots are required to be available 45 days prior to the election for military and overseas voters. We get those out to folks, and during that process of them coming back before election day, we had more than we have ever had as far as absentee ballots. So we were just a smidge under 10,000 absentee ballots, which is unheard of. We used to think that 1,500 was like we were really slamming if we got 1,500 absentee ballots. And now, this past election cycle has blown all of our expectations out of the water. But what we do when we receive those, it's important to note that we check the drop boxes. So Ferndale has 2 drop boxes, and we also receive them by mail. So whenever those come in, what we do is we sort them, we scan them into the qualified voter file, which is the state's voter database. And if you follow through the Michigan Voter Information Center, that's where you'll see absentee applications sent and received, or absentee ballots sent and received. That's where those statuses come from, is when we send or receive something through the qualified voter file. And so we compile those. We actually hired a staff of 4 people who worked 24 hours per week, every week for the 6 weeks prior to the election to audit all of those all those ballots after we scan them in, to make sure that everything's scanned in properly. We check all the signatures. Signature verification is something that people got really interested in this year. And the easy answer to what are you verifying is it's your driver's license signature. So all of that happens, during the whole 6 weeks prior to the election. There are just, every step of the way we have to comply with election laws, deadlines. And we work very hard in Ferndale to get a lot of communication out. We think that's really important. I primarily use the Ferndale Forum and the fabulous Ferndale Forum to get a lot of information out. Our city communication staff was great too. But, there's just so much disinformation that can happen that it's really, truly important to be able to give people the facts on what's happening. And once election day is all over, the election is not over. People are now hearing about the Board of Canvassers, which, lots of folks probably weren't aware that such a thing exists. But what we do after election day, each community in a county has to go before the Board of Canvassers to make sure that everything that was done on election day is, if it wasn't done correctly, or there's a question, or, something is out of balance, what happens and what makes that out of balance happen. So those are questions that we have to answer. And there's a lot of research that goes into finding out exactly what happened after election day, because, it's a 16-hour day. And even by the end of the day, when people are in front of our receiving board, they'll be like, why is this, what's this discrepancy? And they'll have no idea, because it's been such a long, hectic day. But, it's important that people know that after the election is done, we are still working to make sure that everything that can be balanced is, and if it can't be, to figure out why. So, education is a huge thing for me, and I don't want to take up any more time right now, but, happy to answer any questions as they come along.
Thank you very much. So I also wanted to let people know that that's a good segue to the questions. If anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and put them into the chat, and we'll be asking those in probably another 5 or 10 minutes. So, okay, let's go on to Kathleen. Kath Maisner, if you could, I'm gonna make sure you're unmuted and put you on the spotlight for everyone. And if you want to share with us about your experience, that would be great.
Hey, hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm here to tell you about being a precinct worker and chairperson. This is a job, it's an unusual job because you don't do it very often. You only do it when there's a primary or a general election. But it can be long and difficult and stressful when you do. And as someone who taught high school and middle school students for 38 years, I know long, difficult, and stressful jobs. I have been either a worker or a chairperson for every election for the past 12 years. Workers begin well before election day. We get training by the county or township clerk, and chair people get additional training so that we're familiar with all of the machines and each step of the process. We arrive well before 7 a.m. on election day to set up the voting area, make sure that the voting booths are supplied, that the application forms are out, and that we are familiar with the tabulator and the other various machines. Workers want to make sure that voting moves smoothly and quickly and easily from the time the polls open at 7 a.m. until they close at 8 p.m. We are all volunteers. We're volunteer members of the community, so we want things to go well for everyone. And depending on the number of voters at any time, it can be pretty hectic. Workers get a couple of short breaks during the day, lunch and dinner. Most of the time we stay right where we are. Occasionally people have come back after leaving the building to find there's no parking space and the lines are very long. So it's just easier to stay in the building. A precinct workers' day does not end at 8 p.m. when the polls close. First of all, anyone who is in line at 8 p.m. is allowed to vote. After that last person votes, everything has to be balanced and counted and closed and locked and signed by all of the people who have been working that entire day. And then the chairperson and one other worker take everything to the clerk's office, where once again it's reviewed and checked and balanced and signed for. It's a very involved process. And as Marne said, I would invite anyone to join us and see how it works. It can be a 15 or a 16-hour day. Nevertheless, it's a highly rewarding experience. Precinct workers are always in demand, and I would encourage people to volunteer to find out how the process works. It's a valuable way to give back to your community. And as we in League of Women Voters say, democracy is not a spectator sport. So we would like people to get involved. A few things to remember when people go to the polls that would make things so much easier for precinct workers. One is, remember that we're all volunteers. Second, that we're people who are doing our best in what can be a difficult situation. Third, remember that we don't make the rules, but we are sworn to enforce them. And last, please remember that we're your neighbors. We live down the street, we shop in the same stores you do, we're working to make this process a good one for you. Thanks so much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to take you off spotlight. I'm going to put Lisa on. Okay, and then Lisa's going to share with us a little bit about her day working with the absentee and the absentee ballot counting board.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi. Yep. I'm Lisa Wetzen. I live in Pleasant Ridge, and I actually worked the absent ballot counting board 2 different times, one for the primary and then one for this election. Prior to that, I had been a poll worker for several of the elections in Pleasant Ridge. And when the decision was made that Pleasant Ridge would participate in that consolidated ballot counting, our city clerk asked if I would participate in it and represent Pleasant Ridge at that. So I would say we're the worker bees. All of the work that Marne did and what Kathleen is talking about, everything that has to be done and set up prior to us being there is all done by the staff of the elections office at the county. So we were up at the Oakland County Complex, which is on North Telegraph Road, for those of you who are familiar with it. During the primary, we had 4 pods of people. So we were in 4 different groups of about 50 people in each room. More municipalities decided to join for the election. So they added 2 more pods. So there were actually 6 pods of us as ballot counters. And so the pod I was in was actually over in the courthouse. So we were by ourselves. It was interesting. We had to go through the metal detector anytime we wanted to do anything. So, but the courthouse obviously was closed and there was no activity other than the polling. So what we did is first we had a 2-hour mandatory training session that we had to participate in. And that was done about 5 days before the election. So they had to train all of the workers in what the process and procedures are. And we had to sign in and basically validate that we are who we said we were. And then after the 2 hours of training, we came back and we had to be at the poll place or at the counting place at 6:15 to make sure they could check everyone in. We were not able to do anything or touch any of the ballot or ballot material until 7 o'clock when the polls open, because that's basically the requirements set forth by the state. So when we did our training, we were trained on specific tasks of what we would do. And in addition to getting the training, we had a piece of paper that was taped to the desk in front of us in case we didn't remember anything. So all the steps for your respective position were right there at your seat. So we had to be sworn in. We had to take an oath that we would not be divulging any of the information during the day. As the election progressed, we were sequestered, and we also could not have any outside communications device, so that we were completely cut off from the outside, so that we had no access to media and had no view of what was happening throughout the election day. So although we didn't have poll workers, or although we didn't have voters coming in, we were the same. Even though the voting ended at 8 o'clock, we had to stay until all of the ballots that we were counting were processed. My particular pod processed all of the absent ballots that had been collected from Royal Oak. So we had approximately 25,000 ballots that we had to go through, just to give you an idea of the volume for those people in the room. And there were multiple stations that we had, and we could stay in the station that we were trained in, or we could rotate for people to give some relief. But we basically worked from 7 in the morning till finally when they signed off that all of the ballots had been processed and scanned, and it was about 8:30. So again, it's a long day, but very, very fulfilling. I want to say kudos to the elections office in the county. They did a ton of work to get that set up. There were a lot of high-speed machines to open the ballot envelopes, as well as the high-speed scanners to process the ballots. And it made it, I think, easier on everyone all the way around. They put a lot of effort into that. So I think what we mentioned that we had a whole range of people working. I'd say predominantly our pod anyway had mostly older people. We had a few high school students, which was interesting. And then we had a few people who had the day off and had volunteered to work that day. We had 2 15-minute breaks, and we had a half hour for lunch and a half hour for dinner. So we were pretty much working the entire time we were there. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
So actually, I do have a question for you. Actually, you already answered one of them, which was what community did your pod count? And that was, you said Royal Oak.
Yep.
And the other question was, did you have any poll challengers at your location or poll watchers that were there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Obviously, one of the things that was stressed was protection for us as poll workers from the standpoint of PPE equipment, and they were very good about providing all of that. And we had acrylic screens between each of us, and we were spaced 6 feet apart. So they had a very limited number of poll watchers that they could have in there, and those folks could walk around. But I would say they were very diligent about ensuring that they were not getting too close to us. I think everybody really recognized the situation. And we had, I don't know, probably about 6 people in the room in that role.
Okay. And then what does it mean to process? I think you said process an absentee ballot. So what specifically happens, like once the ballot comes to you? What exactly were you?
Yeah, there's actually several steps, and it's a very, it's kind of like a production line process, I'll say. Everybody has a repeatable task that they do, but the ballots come in, the big mail bins, and they're all sealed. So the first thing that's done is they go to they had 3 stations that have the high speed openers. And so there were people that strictly opened the ballots. And when I say open the ballots, they just tore open the top of that mailer envelope. So that was one position. Then they brought those ballots over to the first station of our table, and each table had the group of 6. And so the first person matched the ballot number inside the ballot, matched the ballot number on the outer mailing envelope. And that's all they did. They then pulled the ballot in the secrecy sleeve out and put the mailer envelope in a bin. They then handed the secrecy sleeve with the ballot to the next station. The next station tore off the top tab and removed the ballot from the secrecy sleeve, the internal sleeve. That's all they did. They handed it to the third station, which opened up the ballot, flattened it out, uncreased it, and that station prepared it to go through the scanner so that it was as flat as possible. And then batches of 50 ballots were then taken to the next station. And that next station was the scanning station, where they fed the ballots into the high-speed scanning machine in those chunks of 50. And the reason it was a chunk of 50 is because that's what the capacity of the scanner was. And then all of the ballots were run through the scanner, which then did a tabulation of the number of ballots, and it took an image of every single ballot that was run through it. So you had the paper copy, and then you had the scanned copy, which is, I'm sure, similar to what Marne does in, the normal ballot process. It was just, we were doing it for all the absent ballots.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then
Sure.
I have a number of questions for Marne, so I'm going to take you off of Spotlight and put Marne back on. Okay. So first question here is, Ferndale used the Oakland County AVCB. How did that go? How much did it help? How many AV ballots were received in Ferndale after the cutoff that Ferndale had to count?
Well, it went really well. This is the first year that that was an option. Every community has had its own absentee counting board up until 2020. There was a public act earlier in the year that allowed for communities to either combine to create their own absentee counting board or to contract with the county to provide the absentee counting board services. So, I do not have high-speed tabulator scanners, and I do not have high-speed letter openers. And so Ferndale was one of the first communities that was very interested in jumping onto that. And I think it's gone really well. It went really well in August. It went really well for us this time. It was a kind of a learning experience how to handle those ballots that come in afterwards. So what happens is we are keeping them all secured up until 4 o'clock on Monday, the day before the election, at which point then the chain of custody goes to Oakland County. We delivered close to 9,000 ballots. Me and one of my election staffers, as well as a police officer who brought us and the ballots out to the county, where they were exchanged to the Oakland County Bureau of Elections. And so, all that went really well. We did not get as many, we got about 500 ballots between the time that we dropped the ones off at Oakland County and then at the end of the day. So we had really been inundated in August. So, it was a really good learning experience how to best handle those. So, we've got a process down now that we had so many volunteers lining up to be precinct inspectors, which was amazing. So we were able to have each and every of our 9 precincts had its own little kind of mini absentee counting board, so that they were just processing those in the way that Lisa said, with, opening the envelopes, taking them out, counting them, flattening them, removing the stubs, all of that. So it was a really great process for us. And in August, we received 1,200 of the total 5,000 absentee ballots that we got were dropped in our drop boxes after 4 p.m. on the day before the election. So that was a very interesting learning curve, but it's a great process. And, I encourage other communities to use it as well. As long as that service is available, I think that's what we'll be doing in Ferndale.
Okay. The next question is, are you required to send the county clerk stats on the number of ballots that were rejected and why? And if so, can we get those stats from the county clerk for each municipality, or do you have to go to each city clerk separately to get those stats?
Well, actually, all that is in the qualified voter file, which is the state's voter database. So we don't really have to report them to the county because they have access to all that information through the QVF, which is, abbreviation for qualified voter file. In Ferndale, the majority of ballots that were rejected rejected at the request of the voter, which means on election day, those folks who either didn't receive their ballot in the mail or got it and, were just holding on to it to decide on, closer to the election, whether they wanted to vote absentee or in person. So those were the majority of the rejected ballots. So when that happens, the precinct inspectors contact the clerk's office. We make sure that the ballot has not been received before we authorize them to issue a ballot in the precinct. So each and every time, there was 150 odd, it felt like more, but it was about 150 overall that came in during the course of the day that we make sure that they haven't been received. And if they haven't, then we reject them in the system. So to get those lists of rejected ballots, the easiest way is probably just to go directly through the Bureau of Elections, but a county can give those reports, and so can a city. They're easy to get.
So what does it mean? This is something that I think we've been reading about. I know this was covered yesterday in the paper about the votes in Detroit. What does it mean for the ballots to be balanced?
Well, what that means is pretty much what it sounds like. So during the course of the day, we are continuously making sure that everything is in balance. And balancing at the end of the night means that the number of ballots that went into the tabulator match the number of, match with the number of ballots that were sent to the precinct, and taking away the ones that are unused. So if you send a precinct 700 ballots and they use 300, there should be 400 left. And if 300 went through the tabulator, that means it's balanced. So all that is checked by receiving boards at City Hall on election night. But then all of that goes out to Oakland County also on election night. We are sending them tabulator tapes from each of our tabulators and our poll book, which has the statement of votes and the ballot summaries that show what those numbers are. And if there's a discrepancy, generally we'll try to figure that out before we even, if we can do that with a receiving board, then they don't have to do it with the Board of Canvassers later on in the process.
Okay. This is another one related to the ABCVs. So were your precinct ABCVs physically at the individual precincts or at a central location?
Well, the main counting board, of course, was out at Oakland County. But each of our mini AV counting boards were at the physical polling locations because they need to use the same tabulator as the voters do. So each polling location had a little, if it had an extra room, the absentee counting board would be in an extra room working independently of the precinct inspectors, but all using the same tabulator to put the ballots in.
Yes, because I worked in Berkley, and they put those in, and then we had to add those in. Of course, the absentee ballots that went in that separately from the people who were physically coming in and voting.
Right, and all that is balanced out on the ballot summary that comes from the electronic poll book at the end of the night as well.
And did you have a lot of AV ballots that had any kind of signature issues, or did you do anything in terms of contacting voters to?
Yeah, so there's there's guidance from the state that regulates, what you should be looking for with signature discrepancies. As I mentioned earlier, if you are wondering what the signature of record is, it's generally what you've got on your driver's license. But there's, the recognition that people's signatures change over time. And if there is a discrepancy, that's why we encourage emails and phone numbers so that we can contact those folks right away and figure out what the issue is. Sometimes it'll be, someone broke their hand, maybe someone's had a stroke or some other condition that has significantly changed what their signature looks like. And sometimes people just, they had a nice signature and now they have the doctor's signature, and those folks we will contact each and every one of them and ask them to come in and sign a new registration card in front of us so that we can verify that that signature does belong to them. And there are discrepancies and we can't get them all rectified. If somebody doesn't have a phone number or an email address for us to contact them, we'll send them a letter, so they're at the end of the day, there are always a few signatures that you can't get taken care of. But we do work very hard and we make every effort to contact every single voter who has any kind of a discrepancy with their signature.
Okay. And I think Lisa said that they were done with the absentee ballot counting by about 8:30 at night. Was that the case for Ferndale's in terms of your count being kind of wrapped up?
Well, You can drop off an absentee ballot right up until 8 o'clock.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, we weren't even able to get ballots to the precincts by 8:30 because when they come in, we have to sort them and organize them and scan them into the qualified voter file, and create new absent voter lists from the qualified voter file to send out to the precincts with each bunch of ballots. So we got all of our results were done by about 10, which is not bad. I'd say all of the precincts had transmitted their results to the county by about 9:30.
It's funny because I worked in Berkeley, and about 9:30 I'm standing in the precinct, and we have not even ourselves seen the total vote, and they're already calling percentages for Michigan, and I'm like, what precincts are these? Because I know we're very early, like we're getting done really early, like 9:30. We totally didn't expect that at all. I figured we'd be there till 11 at least. I think we got done earlier in November than we did in August. Which is amazing because we had a lot of people working and it all went very smoothly and there were no huge issues. So, but I'm like, I don't know what they're calling this on because we're not even done. So, and if we're not done, I know no one else is done either. So it's pretty funny. Let's see. I have a couple more for you. Oh, when you apply to work, can you choose? I think I turned in when I requested work, I think I sent mine to Oakland County and they just kind of sent me somewhere. So can you request where you work or just kind of get placed? How does that process work in terms of being a poll worker?
Well, up until this year, it was pretty much you applied to your community. So the majority of our precinct inspectors are Ferndale residents, although residency is not required. Which is great because it allows for more people to work in communities that maybe aren't getting as many people applying. You also can go through the county, and this year the Secretary of State ran a program called Democracy MVP, where they were also accepting applications from prospective precinct and workers, and keeping in touch with the communities and finding out, when we were full, they would send them off to somebody else. And that really is, I would love to put in a plug right now for, it's not just the presidential election that needs precinct inspectors. It is every single election. And in Ferndale, we have a very difficult time recruiting Republican inspectors. Ferndale is, more well-known as a Democratic community, and a lot of the residents are. And, so it can be very hard to get that required balance. And that's required by election law. To the best of your ability, you are to have a balance of Democratic and Republican inspectors, and you do have to declare which party you are affiliating with when you apply to be a precinct inspector.
Okay. How many ballots were turned in too late and went uncounted? And do those people get notified?
Majority of the ones that we got this year, I will say that we had a higher percentage of ballots returned than we ever have. It was 97%, which is incredible considering that we were just a smidge under 10,000 ballots sent out. I don't have the exact number offhand right now, but we always do receive a few in the mail after Election Day. Ordinarily, we don't reach out to each and every person. So if someone sent them from like out of state or something, or tried to overnight them to us and it didn't get to us, we will absolutely let them know. But it's a negligible number. I don't think we had maybe 25, if that.
Okay. And then this is the last one, I think, for you for right now. I have to find it again. Was there an equal number of Republican and Democratic poll challenges? You may not know the answer to this actually, but poll challenges at the precincts in Oakland County. Was there an equal number at absentee counting sites?
That I really don't have information on. I do know that the challengers have to register with the county unless they're from one of the political parties. So there are a number of groups that will also register to be challengers prior to election day. But yes, I don't have information on which parties particularly sent challengers.
Okay, and then last thing was, what do you think about having the shift work? Is it easier to have people come in shifts that you can maybe recruit more people, or is it easier if you have everybody sort of in the room the whole time?
Well, it's definitely easier to recruit offering part-day shifts. So Ferndale, we generally do a 6 to 2 or a 2 to close shift for people who can't do all day. And it's a long day. I mean, I get to work at 5:30 in the morning and I'm usually there till 1 or 2, Inspectors don't have to be there that long, but it's a very long day. And it's preferable to have someone who can be there the entire day, just from a procedural standpoint and for placing inspectors. But, I mean, we don't ever, disqualify anyone for not being available to work all day, and I think the shifts are important to keeping people fresh, because you are the person who knows best what you are capable of. And there's going to be a day where, I know I'm not going to be on my toes 20 hours after I started. So,
right, exactly.
I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah. And then do you know how challengers get trained? Where do the challengers, in terms of poll challengers?
I am not aware of how they get trained.
No idea. Okay. Yeah. I know we had a challenger at the precinct that I was at in Berkley. We were at Berkley High School, and he was from the DNC, and he had been a challenger for like 20 years, had been a challenger since like 2000 or something, I think was the first election that he started at. And he said that basically what he's typically looking for and issues that he's run into have been things like, and this was not in Oakland County, this was in a different county, but where there were 5 precincts in a gym and 2 extension cords. Right. And there were, he was in one time, he said, where the booths, where you stand at, all those booths were in a room, the door was locked, they could see them all through the glass, and no one had the key. So he said, someone showed up about 9 a.m. with the key, and they spent the next hour putting all the booths out. So things like that are sort of the things that he's said that he'd run into, but had not really seen, any kind of voting issues beyond kind of, probably a planning issue. Someone's new, doesn't know, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, kind of thing, was more the issues that he had seen. So
yeah, there are state laws about what challengers can and can't do, and any challenges need to be addressed to a precinct chair. They can't be, you can't walk up to a voter and say, hey, I don't think you're registered to vote. They do have to have a list of criteria generally in advance of why they are challenging a person's vote. It's not something that's arbitrary and just based on how someone looks, or if they don't speak English well, or anything like that. So, I do believe that they, I don't know what the process is, but I do believe people are trained in the basic laws before they are sent out to be challengers.
Yeah, and if I recall, it's that anybody can be a watcher, anyone can be a poll watcher, but you have to be from a specific group to be a challenger.
Correct.
Yeah, so presumably the answer is that that group would train you.
They should, yes.
Yes, one would hope.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. All right, let's see. So I'm going to take you off spotlight here. I have a couple more questions here. It's about 6:15. Lisa, I have a couple questions for you. So I'm going to put you on the spotlight here. And someone was wondering, you had described sort of the process, and they were wondering what part of the process did you specifically work on during the day? Did you rotate to different jobs, or did you pretty much do one thing?
Well, each table, there were tables of 6, and each table could decide if they wanted to stay in the same position they were in all day, or if they wanted to switch among themselves. So at our table, I was the one at the end flattening out the ballots. And then when that was finished, we had moved all of our ballots over to the scanning machines, and they had some issues with the scanning machines. So, and when I say issues, they were not running as fast as they had hoped. They're supposed to be high-speed scanners, but they got backed up. So I went and one other person went and helped them with the scanning at the end of the counting.
Okay. Let's see. I think there was one more for you to, I think you already answered this question actually about whether you had any poll challengers, and you said that you did have some poll watchers and challengers.
Yeah, we had poll watchers and poll challengers, and one of our poll challengers was actually from Livingston County. So she had applied to be a challenger in a different county from her own, which I thought was interesting. We also had, from a watcher standpoint, we had both the parties, and we had a couple third-party nonpartisan groups, and then we had, I think we had one representative from the ACLU came into our pod. So I don't know about the other pods, but that's what we had. Okay.
And were there any situations that came up that you didn't know how to handle, or that I'm assuming there's a chair also in. Yeah.
So every pod had a pod supervisor, and they are one of the elections office employees for Oakland County. And so if there were any questions, our guy was Trevor. So, Trevor ran all day long to deal with everybody in the room. So he was the go-to guy.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to take the spotlight off you, and then I do have a question for Kath. And then let's see. Oh, there we go. Hi. So, you have been a precinct chair for many years. Are there any particularly memorable situations that came up during that time? And were there any situations that arose that, you had to get extra help to handle?
Well, as I said, the chairperson does get extra training, but that doesn't mean we're professionals by any means. We're citizens like everybody else. We've just done this a little bit more. And we have constant contact with the clerk's office. I live in Waterford, and so I could either call my clerk or anybody in the office, and they would do things like, I think Marne mentioned people who get an absentee ballot and then decide that they want to vote in person anyway. So, we would make a quick call about that. I would say that I had two experiences in all my years that really, that I remember. One is a woman who came in and asked me, was I the chairperson, and did we have a machine for people with disabilities? Every precinct is supposed to have a machine that can be used for people with disabilities. And I said yes. And well, is it set up? Yeah. Yes. Well, is it turned on? I thought maybe she had somebody in the car who needed to use it and didn't want to bring them in unless she was sure. And so I walked her over and showed it to her, and she said, okay, walked out the door and never came back. So I think she was just checking to make sure we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. And I had one other that really bothered me afterwards. It was a mother and a first-time voter, a college student. They came in, and he said that he had registered on his campus. He was not in our poll book. I called the clerk's office. They had no record of it either. So she was in our record. So she voted, and I told him I was really sorry, because I love when it's first time voters. It's pretty exciting. If you've worked with high school students, it's pretty exciting when they can vote for the first time. Anyway, so they finally left, and she came back in and said, I'm just so disappointed, and he's so disappointed, and isn't there some way that you can let him vote? And I'm like, no, there's no way I can let, I enforce the laws. I don't make the laws. There is no way that I can make any changes. And afterwards I thought, I wonder if they were trying to trick me. But anyway, yeah, I would say those are two things that really I remember.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump back over to Marne for a second, because I did want to, talk about one of the things that we had talked about earlier. I was telling you my sister in Ohio received an absentee ballot application. I will put that in quotes for just my half sister, for her deceased father. And I said, I really highly doubt that came from anything official. And of course, it looked very official and kind of freaked her out. And when she sent it over to me, it indeed was marketing. It was from, a lobbying group or something. So if you want to say something about, I think that's really important, because I think that's one of the things that people see and they can't discern, is this an official piece or is this marketing?
Yes, that is something I answered so many questions over every single election cycle. Yes, there are a number of organizations out there that, they are trying to encourage people to vote. So, you really can't fault them for that. But in the process, it's not just one community organizations that might be doing it. You might get 10 applications after you've already sent one in, so I mean, it creates a lot of confusion and distrust in the process. And as far as folks specifically who have passed away or are no longer in the community, those lists are available through the state. I mean, people can purchase voter lists. Each and every state has requirements for having the availability of those lists, but not everyone is getting them updated at every single election. So like I had one woman who called and she's like, I don't know why my son got this application to vote. He's been living in Chicago for 10 years. And, the part of the process, at least specifically in Michigan, was that the Secretary of State sent out applications to vote for every single registered voter, which that was done in June. So that really pulled out a lot of folks who, either their voter registration hadn't been updated, or, they had passed away, or they had moved out of the state. And so it gives an opportunity to, find out those folks who really shouldn't be registered anymore. But, it is important to recognize that, your city clerk is sending you information that comes straight from the qualified voter database, and we only send ballots when they are requested. So were your sister to have sent that in, forging dad's signature, that's a crime.
Right.
That person is committing election fraud, and also we wouldn't, if it were my office, we would be checking the signature and seeing that the signature is, it's not by the same person. As a matter of fact, we did have an instance where a voter passed away between the time that we sent her application to her. It was signed by someone close to her signature, but maybe not quite. But due to the state's signature guidelines, we sent the ballot out. But when the ballot came in, there was yet a third signature that was distinctly different. And when the election was over, we received notification that voter had passed away. So, that ballot was not counted because the signature didn't match. And we tried to contact them and didn't have, we had to send a letter. But, you know, those things, you know, they're investigated, they are, you know, followed up on. You can't just, you know, submit a dead person's ballot and have it count.
Right. Exactly. Did you, and I just had a question come in that's also for you. Did you receive any AV ballots in your Dropbox that were for other communities?
Yes.
Were there? Yes. And how does that get handled?
Well, we always contact the community. If it's someplace close by, then of course, you know, like Detroit will just send people up to grab them. We ran quite a few over to Royal Oak Township. You know, we had a lot within the metro area. We did have a few that were from outside of the metro area. And if we get them in time, we will, you know, send them off to the community. But if it's someplace that's not within driving distance and it's too close to the election, you know, the best thing that we can do is notify the community that we've received them, so that they can try to contact the voter and maybe have them spoil that and be reissued a new one that they can get in time.
Okay. And let's see, this last question, it's a courtesy question. So while people have until 8 on election day to drop their ballot off, is it better for you, for the process, if people drop their ballot off on Monday by 4, or does it really matter?
Yes, it does. It does matter. And yes, it is much easier for our staff to process them if we receive them anytime before the final weekend is best. You know, everything that is received by 8 p.m. will be processed. It will be processed much more efficiently if we receive it prior to 4 o'clock on Monday, the day before the election.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody. It's about almost 6:30. I know Lisa is, Lisa's carriage is coming to take her away at 6:30. So I just want to make sure to thank all of you so much for being here. And Jerry Rinchler was going to give us some closing words here. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who is here. We had a high point, it was about 36 people on the call. So it's awesome to have such a number of people here. And Jerry, I'm trying to see, do I have you muted or unmute? Where are you?
I think I'm good.
Okay, you're unmuted. There you are.
Yay, thank you, Kathy. Marne, Lisa, and Kathleen, we so appreciate your joining us this evening. It's certainly a very holiday time of year when I know you've all got lots to get to. And we really appreciate your sharing all your experiences. For those of us who've never worked at the polls or been a poll watcher, and with all the very timely questions and critiques that are occurring right now, we can't thank you enough. I am the Vice President of the League of Women Voters for Oakland, but also chair of the Community Engagement Committee. So my thanks to Kathy Henry, who's been a longtime member, Maria Wilson, Jim Treehorn, Nancy Lewis, and Jenny Alvarez. It does take a village to make this happen. And for those of you who might not be a member and would like to join the League of Women Voters, you can go to our website, my.lwv.org, which is a new website for us, so check that out. We do serve 60 communities and 27 school districts. And we've always got lots of committee work and always welcoming new members. So thank you and have a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.